Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of The Next Perfect Step, where all possibilities lie in conversation. And I am so excited for our conversation today and our special guest, Henry Cameron. And I will let Lori introduce him.
Yes, thank you. We're so excited to have Henry Cameron Allen with us today. And he is a good dear friend of mine. I've known him since 2016 when we were in Gloucester. We worked together, Gloucester, Mass, on a project for school children learning in a kind of non-traditional way for a summer program. But anyway, Henry Cameron is multi-talented, and I would like to just read a little bit about his bio. Henry Cameron Allen was steeped in world culture from an early age. Growing up in Europe and Latin America has had a profound effect on his life's work as an international artist, educator, grief and survival counselor, and life skills mentor. Surviving cancer, overcoming obesity, single parenting, and then outliving his beloved 13-year-old son to brain cancer in 2008 have taught him many lessons in resilience, courage, empowerment, and integrity. He lives with mobility and CPTSD disabilities, made easier with his amazing assistant service dog, Flat Stanley, who accompanies him through life's adventures. He is currently based in a tiny, ancient, remote village, Extremadura, Spain. And to contact Henry Cameron and to find out more about his work, please go to his website, which we'll post on the bottom of this page, is henrycameronallen.org. Welcome, Henry. I know you have so many gifts and talents, and we just like to have you share a little bit about what you're doing and where you are now in Spain and whatever you'd like to share. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lori. It's so great to see you. It's been a while.
It has.
I've been living in Europe now going on 7 years since I left Gloucester, Massachusetts, and the Folklore Theater Company where we met. And you remember we started a Young Mystics Club that was a program for the school holidays to give kids a sense of their own power in different modalities, ancient modalities, from Reiki, which every single child from age 5 and up became a level 1 Reiki master at the end of the course. I thought that was amazing.
That was.
The stories that came back about how, you know, their dog had a tummy ache or their mom had a headache and that they were helping them through was just so precious. And I'm still trying to find a way to do a similar program online because I think it's so important to teach children from their foundation years the strength that they have as healers. And boy, does the world need it.
And they're so natural about it too. They're just open, right? Yeah. It's a great experience.
So I had the Folklore Theater Company in Gloucester for about 10 years, and we were preserving and protecting the stories, the local stories that were dying with the people that carried them. This is something that I've seen all over the world, in many cultures, I would say in every culture. And ancestral stories are not being taught at home anymore. They're not being taught at school or at church or wherever the place of worship is. And how do we know who we are if we don't know where we come from? I think that's really important to not only conjure, you know, whose shoulders you're standing on, but also the imagination is a muscle like every other. And to be able to imagine our ancestors the way that they imagined and questioned the mysteries of the universe. I think, you know, it's a big impulse for who I am and who I've become. You know, as you mentioned in my bio, my dad was a cultural diplomat. And so we lived in many countries growing up. And I learned many languages and saw many faiths. And the whole spectrum of humanity was really paraded across our doorstep on a daily basis. And so looking at the world through that lens, gave me a particular and perhaps a bit of a unique perspective on how interconnected we actually are. And my childlike sense of wonder has never disappeared. I'm always curious, I'm always interested, and it's through our stories that we discover one another. 15 years ago now, my son transitioned through brain cancer. He was 13 years old, and I was a single father. And so I've been on a bit of a quest the last 15 years in terms of self-identity. Anyone who's a parent knows that the core of your identity is your parenting. Every house you live in, every neighborhood you live in, every roll of toilet paper you buy, you're thinking about your child first, right? So when that's plucked out of the equation, well, now who am I? My grandmother used to say, you're an artist if you're making art. Well, you're a parent if you're parenting. And so if I'm not parenting, what am I now? And so I had this existential crisis. And I was living in Minneapolis at the time, which is where he was born and raised. And I had to get out of Dodge. I had to, I couldn't go to the grocery store without somebody falling apart in my arms. Cameron was beloved. He was, held in grief by so many people in our community. And I didn't feel like I really had the space to follow my own grief journey because I was holding everyone else through theirs. And so I took a road trip to the closest place I could think of where I could feel small again. I had to get my scale back because for 2 years I was a superhero, larger than life, trying to save him from his destiny, really. And the Grand Canyon was the closest I could think of. Have either of you been to the Grand Canyon?
Not yet.
I highly encourage it.
No, I haven't either.
Anyone who's on a spiritual journey, I think, for me, my journey was my grief journey, which is a sacred spiritual journey for everyone who goes through it, of parental grief. There are these long stretches of desert before you ever get to the canyon, maybe 70 miles with no civilization, no gas stations. You got to fill up before you head into the desert. I mean, really a metaphor for.
I was thinking that too. Yeah.
And I was driving one of these long stretches, and it was about 3 a.m. And the only thing that I could see were the magnificent stars in the sky, inky black all the way around me, and the lights on the pavement of the road. And I saw this brighter light on the horizon, and I was hoping it was a gas station or something, a place I could get a cup of coffee or whatever. And I arrived there, and it was this 100-foot tall lamppost. And in the beam, there were 3 buildings. One was a small motel. One was I think it was Zuni tribe trading post. And there was a post office. Nothing else for miles and miles and miles, but it had its own zip code. And I looked up at the post office, and it was Cameron, Arizona.
Oh, wow.
Chills, total Twilight Zone moment, right? Cameron obviously is my son's name. And I caught 40 winks in the motel. I woke up the next morning, and there was a Zuni elder sitting on her blanket selling jewelry. I bought this ring from her. And I asked if I could sit with her and ask her a question because, she obviously looked like she had a lot of wisdom. She was a sage. And she invited me to sit down with her. And I said, I just recently, just a few months ago, outlived my son. He passed from brain cancer. And I'm struggling with finding a sense of identity around that because there's a word like widow or orphan for people who have lost other beloved partners and parents, but there's nothing in any language that I could find to identify a parent who had outlived their child. I tend to sway away from the word loss, and we can talk about that later, but She said, maybe it's too profound for a mere word to describe. I said, is there anything in your language or your culture that holds this piece? And she said, well, in my culture, your name would change because your name is the expression of your identity. And when your identity changes to this degree, your name must change, the way you express yourself. And so I would introduce you, for instance, as Henry, whose son is gone. That would become your name. People, when you're not in the room, will talk about you with that new identity. Oh, I saw Henry, whose son is gone at the market today, right? Or even if they think about you, they think of you with your new identity so that everyone who knows you or is aware of you is holding you in your grieving. And I thought, oh, what a beautiful gesture. It didn't quite fit into the global lexicon. I didn't want to walk around introducing myself as, hi, I'm Henry, whose son is gone. Nice to meet you. Too big, too fast, too in your face, too much, right? So I decided to hyphenate his name with mine, our first names, Henry-Cameron. And the way people do when they, have a partnership and they hyphenate their last names to create a new identity together, right? So when one has outlived a child, we rarely hear their names spoken, even by family members. People don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to make you sad, like you're going to forget your child's name, right? And you long to hear their name spoken. It's a frequency, for goodness sakes. And just because they're in a different frequency than they were when they were here, doesn't mean that that frequency is gone or lost. Right? I say all the time, they're not a set of keys or a favorite scarf. We know precisely where they are. We didn't lose anything. They live on inside of us now. And so Henry Cameron, with the hyphen, that hyphen is a link. It's a bond. Eternally, people connect the two of us now. It keeps his name in the world, which is such a comfort. But it's also a mathematical equation. It's Henry minus Cameron. It's Henry whose son is gone. And not gone in the spiritual sense, but gone only in the physical sense. So it tells the story, and it did enough. It did enough for that time.
Thank you for sharing that, Henry Cameron. That's very touched my heart, and I'm sure to all who hear it. Thank you for sharing it.
Well, I know we're heading into the holiday season, and there are so many of us who are dealing with grief. And the holidays, any milestone is difficult, but the holidays seem extra. And so I wanted to share a little bit about my journey, just to let people know that it's not hopeless, that there are ways to move through your grief in a profoundly meaningful way, and allowing your loved one, whether it's your child, your parent, your partner, your friend, to be alive in you and through you, work through you. It's very special.
Yes, I agree with what you said about storytelling. It is important to hear all of our stories. People can relate and hold space for one another, and we don't. Me and Lori are part of an elder community where they get together and the elders come and tell stories. And that's like my favorite part, is to hear those stories. And I do think that we've gotten away from it, and that storytelling is so important. I love what the sage said about, how you changing your name so that we can hold space. But I think that we're in a society, like you said, it didn't feel right because it was in your face. And as a mother myself, there is a sadness for you, from me to feel that. But I don't think that we're taught how to hold space, right? That word compassion isn't sadness or sorrow. Compassion is holding space, right? Being able to hold space. And it's just so important that you put that out and let people see to see that it's not that they need to be forgotten, right? They're gone, but they're not gone in your heart or in you, or that whole concept of like you said, being gone. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important for people to be able to hear that. And the holidays are a tough time. I lost my mother 22 years ago. And I think the holidays, we're grown up to believe, the holidays is a family time, right? So physically we feel that that missing, but you said, like they're not gone from us. They're not lost. They're not gone. But I think holidays, especially, it's the physical part that we connect with the holidays. And so it becomes a tougher time. And if we can become a society where we can hold that space, we can hold the space for them there, even without the physical. So thank you very much for sharing that story and that part that we get to realize. And maybe now we can even hold compassion for other people.
Well, you're so welcome. And, there are ways to bring them physically, the sense, the essence of them. Cultures do this all over the world, not so much in America, North America. I think to a degree, indigenous cultures do still maintain a connection with ancestors. And let's face it, nobody talks about the fact that people like me, our children are now our ancestors. That's not something we ever really think about. But this is something that's been coming up in me a lot these past few years, especially that I've been traveling a lot, and I'm in one of my ancestral homelands here in Spain. And, to think about, even we just passed Dia de los Muertos, right? The All Souls, All Saints, Halloween, Samhain, that time of year where the veil is thinner. And cultures around the world do some kind of a practice to invite their ancestral essences back into the physical with them. They manifest it physically. They have a shrine, right? An ofrenda, it's called in Spanish, where you put favorite foods and photographs and clothing and flowers, and you really are creating a physical representation of your loved one in this dimension, right? I remember the first Thanksgiving without Cameron. I was feeling the burn in a big way. And because he passed in mid-September. And so it was very fresh. And I was in my mourning phase. And so I decided to have a seat for him at the table, again, as a recognition of his presence, with a photograph of him there. And we set the place, we filled his plate with his favorite Thanksgiving. I mean, it was all of that, but it helped coming up with some kind of a ritual or ceremony that keeps that connection open. I still read him stories. He would be 28 years old now, but I still read him stories, right? So there are these wonderful connections that we maintain. And in my dream life too, I think that's the other part of being open, is seeing what comes in dreams. One of the after effects of my journey is that I was diagnosed, as Laura, you mentioned, with CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That means it's very, very layered and deep and nuanced. And I believe that a lot of people, not just who have outlived their kids, but have experienced some kind of a major trauma, or walking around undiagnosed without the tools to be able to meet it or to understand it even. And one of the ways that manifests in me is sleep paralysis. Have either of you ever heard of this or experienced it?
Where you're sleeping and you can't move. You're like trying to run or something and you can't move. Is that what you're talking about? Or is it something different?
Kind of. It's when you're deep asleep in your REM state, right? And you're aware that your body is wanting to wake up. And you can't wiggle a toe. You can't open your eyes. You're completely in your dream state. You're free, but physically you are paralyzed and you cannot move. The first few times it was frightening because I didn't know if I had had a stroke, if I was in a coma, if I had died. I didn't know because I'd never experienced this before. But what became apparent to me was over time, this may be the 5th or 6th time that it happened, was that it was my body's way of protecting me from waking triggers. Because when you're going through an episode, a PTSD episode, it's like a tsunami. It hits you from behind. You think you're going along and everything's just fine. You're functional. In my case, sometimes you're highly functional. And then, man, it slams you from behind, unexpected, knocks the wind out of you, knocks you off your feet. You feel like you're drowning. You can't breathe. I mean, it's just very, very intense. And those are to be avoided, of course. Nobody wants to feel that way. And so what I found is that I have much more control in my dream state than I do in my waking state over those things. Tsunamis don't hit me in my dream state. Right? I don't feel any threat. I don't feel any danger. I don't feel any panic. None of that. I did it first with the sleep paralysis. I was panicked because I didn't know what was happening. But then I found that wisdom would come to me, imagery would come to me, experiences would happen in my dream state that could never happen in my waking state. And then I would break through and bring that wisdom from my dream state into my waking state. And the first time that really manifested for me was just a few months ago. You know what a peregrine falcon is, right? So this beautiful peregrine swooped down out of the sky and landed in front of me and looked up at me and said, "It's time." That's all it said. And I opened my eyes. I broke through my paralysis. And I knew exactly what it meant. Here's the word. Here's the widow orphan word for parents who have outlived their children, peregrine. It's an elegant word. It's non-gendered. The peregrine falcon is native to every continent except Antarctica, where there are no people. So it's recognizable as a universal symbol. And in most cultures, symbolically, it means strength, courage, resilience. And when you go back to the ancient root, I started Googling right away, you know, the root of the word peregrine. What does it mean? Well, its original meaning in Latin was a lost traveler, or a stranger in a field, a pilgrim on a sacred journey. In fact, in Spanish and Portuguese and other Latin-based languages, peregrino means pilgrim. So it ticked all the boxes, you know? And so I'm just blowing this up in my head. I'm like, we have our word. This is our word. I'm a peregrine. How cool is that? So now, and I still keep Henry Cameron, obviously, but now I have an identifier, and I hope people will start using it for themselves if they have outlived their kid, or in reference to other people. I would love to see it appear in the dictionaries under the definition of peregrine as an added definition. It's a powerful, elegant way of expressing who we are. It's also the fastest animal on the planet. Did you know that?
That's profound, Henry Cameron.
Yeah.
That's profound.
This has been a profound journey. Let me tell you.
Wow.
You know, there are gifts. There are gifts in the grief. There are always gifts in the grief, but we have to be open to them. And acceptance is the first step. The reason that definition of peregrine, lost traveler, hit me at my core is that I have a foundation that is an empowerment organization for parents who have outlived their kids, and it's called the Lost Travelers Club. The Lost Travelers Club. You can go to losttravelers.club and you can find it.
You named that before you had this realization about the peregrine meaning. That's
Yes.
incredible.
I feel guided. I really feel Cameron's hand is in every aspect of my life. It really, really is. And I think it's because I've been open to it. My perspective on death has changed profoundly over these past 15 years. And that's the gift in the grief, is that it opens us up to perspectives that we could have never conceived, right? No parent is sitting there actively fearing outliving their child. It's always a fear, it's always a concern, but it's not obsessive, is it? I mean, I never experienced it that way. Here's another quick story that leads to all of this. I mean, you can look back in hindsight, any of us, and you can see how every moment has led to the next to bring us to where we are, right? So when I was 8 years old, we were living in Vienna, Austria, and I was attending the international school, second grade. And my teacher, Mrs. Fend, which I love to this day because it's like, fend for yourself, kids. She had us do a homework assignment. And the assignment was to write a paragraph, a short paragraph, on what is your greatest fear. And I remember sitting there looking at this blank piece of paper as an 8-year-old thinking, why would a grown-up ask a child to focus on their fear? Why would we want to give that attention when we want to forget our fears and avoid them, right? And I wasn't a fearful child. I wasn't afraid of the dark. I wasn't afraid of a monster under my bed or in my closet. I wasn't afraid of being abducted, which a lot of diplomats' kids, it was a reality. You know, you had to be aware of that possibility. I wasn't fearful. I wasn't afraid of the dark. And so I really struggled with this assignment. And the only thing that came to me as I'm sitting here was outliving my children. I always knew I would be a father. And the only fear that I could identify at 8 was outliving my children. So having come to the other side of that fear, having survived it and met it face on, meant that I transcended it like any other fear. And I don't believe in death anymore. And that opened me up to looking for, well, if death isn't a thing, what is it? And so I started studying quantum physics. And we know through the study of quantum physics, which is now, you know, on the tip of everybody's tongue, and I think everybody should be looking into it, whether you're spiritual or scientific or a mix like me. What quantum physics says, quantum theory, is that everything is frequency. And a frequency can't be created, it can't be destroyed, it just emits, right? We are, the three of us, in a particular frequency right now. Cameron was in the frequency that he was in when he was in the physical, but now he's not in the physical, he's in a different frequency. That's all it is. He's just transmuted, right? We're all energy, we're all frequency. That can't be destroyed. So now what? Now what? What does that mean in the big picture for our relationships with those who have transmuted, right? And so I'm working on a book right now called Quantum Grief. This is my first book I've ever written. And this came to me in one of these sleep paralysis moments. It's another big, it was fully realized in this dream state. And it manifested as a video series. 13 short videos, like 5 minutes each, just sort of guiding through what I found 12 dimensions of grief. I woke up and I wrote it. I wrote the whole thing as a video series. I have an intern. This is being done through the Lost Travelers Club. I have an intern from it's the Art Institute of Cincinnati, and she's an animation intern, so she's going to be animating the whole thing. But I feel like this is something that needs to get out into the world. It feels like it's calling to be talked about because nobody is. So I'm going to do it as an ebook first, with a workbook, with a journal accompanying it, just to guide people. It's just little short chapters. It's not even going to be this big heady thing. Been writing it, editing it in a way that is universally graspable, I guess. So that's exciting, you know. And listen, there's no scientist on the planet today who can tell you the difference, that there is a difference between your dream state and your waking state. Nobody. We don't know that that's true. So what's more real? Is it your dream state or your waking state, or are they equally? I'm finding that they're equally, in that they are interconnected. And I'm able to bring things from that state of what we call dreams and realize them.
That's so exciting. Congratulations. I was thinking about, well, you should write a book. And then you said you had this idea, which is, and I think for me, you said something earlier about community and support. And Laura, you talked about holding space. This is a way to do that you can connect people all around the world who are going through a universal process of grieving, helping them understand and helping them to hold space for that grieving in an understandable and a very helpful way. So congratulations for doing that, and for being guided. That's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. And you're welcome. We all are. I think we all are. We just have to be open to it and be willing to face the fear of the unknown.
Lori, any thoughts so far?
No, just congratulations. Very much looking forward to seeing it come to fruition. I think it's so needed and can help so many people around the world. And like you said, the community of knowing that, you know, you're not going through this alone. There's others, and like yourselves, who can help support and guide people, even through the book and video series. It will touch someone's heart and help create movement in their grief and their process. And I just thank you. That's absolutely, congratulations. That's fabulous.
Thank you. And I do hope that it's a guide. I hope it's people take it as such. I'm not an expert on anything but my own experience. And, my grandmother had a great saying. She used to say, honey, eat the fish and spit out the bones. Take what works for you, and what doesn't, forget about it. It's not meant for you, right? Another project I'm working on writing is a lexicon. I'm calling it, because, the Lost Travelers Club infers that we're on a journey. And when you go on a journey, you always go and find a field guide to help you navigate those off the beaten track places, right? And so I'm working on something I'm calling the Lost Travelers Field Guide, a new lexicon of grief. Because there are words like death, bereavement, loss that I don't experience personally, and that I think we are expected to fall into, but it keeps us in this pattern, this holding pattern, this vortex of grief. Actually, it's not even grief yet, it's mourning. I mean, mourning is part of the grief journey, but I found in these, this dimensional study, that mourning is a temporary and passive state, right? I equate chapter 1 of quantum grief is called the Big Bang. And that's what I equate it to. It's dimension 0. It's from the moment that everything changes. The moment of transformation, not only of the person that you love, but also of yourself, who I hope you also love, right? Nothing is ever going to be the same. So I equate it to the Big Bang in that sense. It's all chaos. It's all trying to make sense of something that you can't possibly grasp, because it was unexpected, or it was, even if, like with Cameron, it was 2 years of living with brain cancer. So we expected it to a degree, but you're never prepared as you want to be. You're never prepared for it. And then dimension 1, after the Big Bang, is where the dust starts to settle and you start to experience your emotions. You're still in mourning. And then you get to a point where, dimension 2, you're starting to broaden and connect with other people, perhaps, that have been through a grief journey. And you move beyond your own immediate one dimensionality, and you're now broadening, right? And then 3 dimensions adds depth into your emotions. And you start to, 4th dimension, you start to move through it, or imagine moving through it even. 5th dimension is actually moving through it. So getting through all of these things is kind of an amazing perspective on grieving. One of the things that I found is that especially men have been groomed to not talk about it, to not talk about the depths of their grief and their emotions. And I think that society on a global scale expects that women will be more open. This is obviously a generalization, because there are some women who cannot be open, and there are some men who are, right? Like me. So this is a broad generalization, but I think, sometimes that's helpful in being sensitive to the differences in the way that people process. And so with the Lost Travelers Club, I started a fellowship of fathers as a circle, not a healing circle, because there is no healing from this. Let's face it. There is coping, there is enduring, but there's no healing from outliving a child. And so what do we do instead? Do we sit around and sob? No. We don't sit around and pat each other on the back and say, I know just how you feel, brother. I mean, there's a little bit of that. But what we are striving to do is to channel our grief, find ways, discover ways, create ways to channel our grief into goodness, so that we can feel a renewed sense of purpose in the world and allow our children, acknowledge and embrace our vulnerability, that our children live here in our hearts, which I call sort of the soul womb, if you will. That came to me last night, actually, in a dream. I woke up it was around 3 a.m, and I had to start writing about this soul womb idea, because men don't carry our children in our bodies. We don't gestate, right? We don't have a physical womb. But what I'm finding now on the other side of this is that it feels very similar to how I imagine pregnancy would feel. You feel this living thing inside of you, this living being, this living energy. I don't want to minimize it by saying it's a thing, but it's very specific. It has some kind of an identity and something you identify with, right? As one does in utero. And we feel those pangs of discomfort, morning sickness. We feel the kick inside. There are so many things that I'm equating to pregnancy. And I'm one of those guys who always said, if I could be pregnant, I would be pregnant. I would love to have that honor and that gift of carrying a life in my body. And now, to a degree, I'm finding that on the other side of this, I am. And what is going to be born, or what has been reborn, is not him, but it's me. This may be out there. This is pretty, this is all just sort of,
Absolutely unique perspective. Yeah, I feel it. Yeah, it's a very unique and profound. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's moving to me too. I mean, it's kind of an eye-opener, and I'm just grateful that I have these epiphanies that are coming through, and that I have the capacity as an artist to translate them in ways that other people can resonate with. I can't control the way they react to them, but if they resonate, whether it's a mother who has carried a child, or a father who has not but always wanted to, or a parent who is struggling to navigate their grief journey. There are ways, there are perspectives out there that we haven't thought of before. And I'm 57 and I'm just finding this stuff now after 15 years of being a peregrine. And so I feel like this is my time to fly. This is my time to share. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk about and get feedback, because none of this is out there in the world yet. You're the first who are hearing about it. So,
and we love that.
I do too.
It's a debut. That's wonderful.
And I also think, like you were saying, your grandmother said about the fish in the bone, that we are all different, right? We're all not the same, and our paths are all different. And so there are many books and things out there on grief and such, and everybody doesn't relate to everybody. You could read a book and just say, well, it didn't really help me. But then they reach yours and they connect with what the journey you've been on, and it helps them through their journey. So I think the different perspectives is needed out there, because it will resonate and support somebody, you know, and that's who will be brought to your journey and to your books. And so again, sharing your story, sharing, you know, your dreams that are coming through is needed. And we thank you very, very much for sharing that here.
I appreciate the encouragement. Lori, you were going to ask me something?
Oh, I think that Lori kind of answered it, but or commented to it, but thank you. Yeah. So do you have any anything else you'd like to add? Or
yeah, actually, you know, one of the parts of this too, when you're having an existential crisis, which I was 15 years ago, you're in a constant state of reinvention. Everything is possible, really.
Right.
And so what I've been trying to do, because like you said, I have a lot of different talents, I have a lot of different passions that, you know, have been all over the place. They've really run the gamut of who I am and my experience. And so I've been working on a project to sort of hone and identify my overarching purpose for being here. I think that's helpful to me as a man. It's helpful to me as a person, to just identify that overarching purpose, that deep joy in my soul that meets a great need in the world, right? I think that is the definition of one's purpose, when a deep joy in your soul meets a great need in the world. But that overarching purpose can't just float because it's gonna fall if you don't hold it up with something. And for me, those are your passions. And so I've identified the passions that are not only born out of my purpose, but they are the pillars that support my purpose. And one is my art. I have a theater company, which Lori, you know, the Folklore Theater Company I had in Gloucester, Massachusetts for almost 10 years.
Fantastic.
Which we were preserving and protecting the stories that were dying with the people that carry them. Mm-hmm. And they were local stories. And in the time that we existed as a brick and mortar theater, we produced more than 40 original shows based on local history.
You've archived some of those too, right? Haven't you archived some of the shows?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to folklore.world, I mean, this is all accessible on my website. But if you go to folklore.world, we actually have a link to past productions where you can actually watch videos if you want to see some of those plays, not all of them, but a few of them. And during COVID, and so these last 6, almost 7 years since I left Gloucester, I hung my theater up on a peg, and I had what I'm considering to be a professional development hiatus, let's call it. I'm coming, you know, to Europe. I'm living all over the UK, and I'm spending time in Switzerland and France and Belgium and Ireland, and absorbing this rich folklore and fairy tales and stories, and finding new ways to tell these stories, and also find the places where they're dying because they're not being taught anymore. And it was during COVID that the group that I was working with, that was planning on touring globally these plays, nobody was going to tour for a long time. So we had to think of another way. And I remembered in the late 60s, I had a record of Danny Kaye. Do you remember Danny Kaye? Telling Grimm's fairy tales. And he did all the voices, but they were layered with music and sound effects and atmosphere. And they just really transported me out of my reality, which was not a happy one. I didn't grow up in a happy household. And so my refuge was to put on my Danny Kaye record. He had a very warm and comforting countenance. He was like a friend. He was a friendly voice, very friendly presence. He was funny. He was also dramatic, right? And what I loved about that was, I don't know from a mental health perspective that I could have gotten through my childhood without Danny Kaye. Mm. And so I had this idea, because the world was in chaos. There were kids that couldn't go to school. They couldn't be around their friends. They were feeling lonely. Everybody was on edge. What if they had a modern time Danny Kaye to share these stories that could click them out of their physical reality and send them on a journey of the imagination, right? You think of old time radio. The listener has to form the pictures in their imagination of what the character looks like and the environment that they're in. The sound effects and the music and all that can create mood and builds a scaffolding for our imagination. But it takes that interaction between the listener and the artists in a way that is unique in the arts. And so we started something called the Luminos Liminos Tales. And these are stories from all over the world that we're interpreting with contemporary playwrights. These are stories from the oral tradition and literature that we're interpreting with modern playwrights into these audio theater stories. And they're about 30 minutes. One of them's an hour, but we broke it up into part 1 and part 2. And we've just started that journey, and people are responding beautifully. And I'm hoping that it'll become something very special. And that holds up and is born out of my overarching life's purpose, which is universal life skills education. That's what the Young Mystics Club was about, wasn't it? Yes. It's about all the skills that we are learning as human beings. Every single one of us, over 8 billion now on the planet, we are learning these skills. It's not a question of whether or not we learn them. It's in what measure do we learn them, and from whom? And where do we go to seek them, to raise our proficiency? And these are things like communication skills, emotional literacy, spirituality. Grief is a universal life skill. We're all going to experience it. We're all going to apply it, right? Nutrition, financial literacy, sexual literacy, environmental literacy, digital literacy. There are so many skills that we are all learning all the time, but sometimes we don't have the proficiency that we want. And the only person who can feel the deficiency is you. Nobody can tell you you're deficient. You will feel it, just like if you want to learn a foreign language, or if you want to ramp up your business skills, or if you want to go and learn Chinese cuisine. You find a master to teach you to amplify those skills in yourself, right? Reiki, like we did with the Young Mystics, right? We had the mystics, which were the students, and the masters. And a mystic is just a truth seeker, which we all are, right? And so universal life skills education is my overarching purpose. My art, through my theater, now audio theater, is one of those pillars. My grief and survival counseling is another pillar that's born out of my overarching purpose, but also supports it, right? I'm now an internationally certified grief and survival counselor, which I'm very proud of. I worked hard for that diploma, but it totally fits in with the Lost Travelers Club, and now it fits in with the Folklore Theater Company, because we are taking these stories. We're not doing them just for entertainment purposes, but like they were for me, they are a mental health focused support for children. We hear what's happening in the Middle East. We hear what's happening in the Congo. We hear what's happening all over the world. And so the stories from those cultures that we are telling will go to support those children by telling their stories in a way that they can imagine, the way I did with Danny Kaye, right? It's pretty special.
Amazing. Thank you for doing that. The world needs it so much.
Oof, it's a lot, but man, I tell you, I have never felt more fulfilled in my life. And none of this conversation would not be happening had Cameron not left the planet when he was meant to. And that's the truth. I used to say that before every show at the Folklore Theater Company. We would stand in a circle opening night, and we would thank Cameron for leaving when he was meant to, because otherwise we wouldn't be having this experience together. That's how powerful you are, listeners, hosts. That's how powerful we are. Our existence matters, and it doesn't go away. Existence is eternal.
That's true. I believe that. It's on my heart. And I know Cameron is cheering you on.
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing today with us, Henry Cameron. It's
Anytime.
a pleasure.
Anytime.
It has been a beautiful experience.
I'll come back when the book goes.
Yes, please. Love that. Lori, I'm sorry, what did you say?
No, I just was going to say this was a beautiful experience. I love hearing your stories, and I can't wait for everyone to hear them and get your book and for all of the exciting things you have coming out for everyone.
Thank you.
We'll post the links below in the below in the comments. So please listen, make comments, like, share, subscribe. We are so happy that you're here, that you've heard these stories from Henry Cameron, and it's touched my heart, and I hope that it touches yours too. And we'll have you back.
Thank you. Anytime. And I'm so happy that you're doing this. These are great conversations. And this is, last thing I remember, when I was in 4th grade, I was at the American school in Brasilia. And my teacher came up behind me because I had drawn a picture that I didn't like. We had to draw a picture of our house and our family, and it wasn't a happy house or a family. And I crumpled up the page and I threw it across the room and sat there with a little storm cloud over my head. And she came up. She was a 6-foot-tall Scottish woman, Mrs. Ardeline. And she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Oh, Henry, nobody's perfect." I looked up at her. I said, "Mrs. Ardeline," I said, "how can I be any different than I am right now? Doesn't mean I'm as perfect as I can be." And that's exactly how I still feel today.
Wow.
That's why I love the name of this podcast, and I love what you're about, because this is perfect. It is absolutely as perfect as it can be, as are we all. So thank you for putting this message out into the world. That's a frequency I can relate to.
You just gave me chills. Thank you.
Well, wishing everyone happy holidays and supported holidays if you're going through some things, and you do have a lot of support. And please check out Henry's or Henry Cameron's or website. Sorry, I'm not speaking. Right? So thank you for joining us.